All right, hi again. So in this video, we're going to do a little bit of an elaborate layout, slightly elaborate layout using CSS grid areas, and also using a nested grid. So a couple of things we're doing here, and then it also has a fallback code using CSS floats and even some flexbox too. So it should work in older browsers that don't understand CSS grid. At least the basics work. And then for newer browsers that understand CSS Grid, it does some pretty cool stuff. So here's what it does overall. So if I go out to the wide kind of desktop layout, it has a sort of a header area up here, links and search there, nav here, main content. And then it's got this area here with 3 containers in it, a sidebar 1 and 2, and then this area for ads. Boo, we don't like ads, right? But I guess they're necessary. And then we've got a different layout with 2 columns here, which you may have seen something like this before, right? And then here's a footer with 5 elements in there with the other link section is twice as big as the rest. So some different things that we're doing here. If I resize it, it's when we get to the first breakpoint, this has 2 breakpoints in this design. So here's the first one, boom, right there. So those 3 boxes rearrange themselves, so now they're in columns or in rows. So we actually changed the number of rows we have here too. We go from 6 to 5 or 5 to 6. We changed the number of rows too, so we'll do that. And so then we go down, keep going down, right? And then we get to sort of a desk or a mobile layout, and we get sort of a stacked kind of standard mobile layout where everything is stacked. So we're doing this mobile first. We'll put in this most of the code, or most of the code's already in there actually, for the mobile layout, which is just stacked. And then at the first breakpoint, we will do this with 3 columns here. So there's 3 columns, and then, or 3 visible columns, and then we'll go out and then we'll split this area up. So it's just showing you that when these areas get too small to be effective, then we're going to change the layout up. So you can do that pretty easily with CSS grid and grid areas. Here is, to help me kind of get this together, I did like a little table in Word, and it helps to actually do that, or draw it or something, so that you can kind of figure out where you want this stuff to go. So I made 6 columns and 5 rows in here, and that was because I'm making a grid that has 6 underlying columns. So you don't necessarily see 6. If you count there's 4 in this area, right? There's only 2 there. So there's things that are kind of spanning different columns and rows. So, but if you drew an underlying grid underneath it, it would be 6 columns. So then I filled this in this little table in Word so that I could see, let me zoom in here a little bit, so I could see where things are. So the header is there, the links and search is there, the nav goes through 2 rows here, the main content is 3 columns and 2 rows, sidebar 1 is 2 rows and 1 column, etc. So you can see how you can kind of plan out where those containers are going to be. So that will help. You don't have to do that, but it definitely helped me to kind of figure out, okay, where is this going to be, and what do I want to happen, and things like that. So one more thing to show you too before we start working on this is in Firefox you can, there's a tool to help you visualize as well. So I'm going to show it to you in the final version here. I'm going to right click and go to Inspect Element, and then I get the inspector right inside of Firefox. At the time of this video, Chrome does not have this feature, so I'm showing it to you in Firefox. But probably Chrome will have it, I bet you, sometime. So when you select something that has a CSS grid in it, like this wrapper, so we have this wrapper container here that is around everything, there is a grid area up here, a grid inspector area. So you can display the line numbers, area names, and lines in the CSS grid. And you can also put an overlay grid. So I'm going to click on wrapper. Let me zoom back out. And as soon as I did that, you see that this inspector puts these lines in. These are the CSS grid lines. So there's 1 through 6 there, and then and 1 through 7 this way. And it also so it shows you where things start and end. And then also it shows you the grid areas. So that, like I said, in this video we're using CSS grid areas, which are a way to kind of define areas that span certain rows and columns. That's basically what it is. So here's the main content area here. Here's sidebar 1, etc. Even when I resize this and it changes, the layout changes, you'll see that the numbers go from 1 to 7 across and 1 to 7 up because we changed our number of rows and columns. And you can see that sidebar 1 now goes this way instead of going this way in this layout. So it's pretty cool. It's a little helpful kind of thing to use. So that is in Firefox. Now Firefox on my computer for some reason is causing some weirdnesses, so I'm going to quit this because I don't want it to mess up our video. So we'll be looking at it in Chrome the rest of the way, but remember that tool is in there. It probably wouldn't mess up your computer, but it's messing up mine for some reason. Okay, so here's our starter file. Let me get this preview up here. So this is what the file looks like to start. It already has a layout. It's not super pretty. This is using mostly floats. I think some of the flex boxes is working here too, but and I just wanted to show you that this is what it would look like on a browser that didn't understand CSS grid, because there's no grid in this yet in our file. So it does work, and it has kind of a 2-column layout here, and then when we get down to the mobile version, it's pretty much the same as it is on the final version. So it's already working. So it's kind of a fallback, good idea to do, especially with things like CSS grid, when during the time of this video is pretty new and may not work for a lot of people because they haven't upgraded their browser. It works on all the latest browsers, but maybe they don't have that, right? So you gotta have to pay attention to that a little bit. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and do this thing. So what I'm gonna do is just go down the file and sort of add in some things, right? So on about line 34, we want to create our grid. So actually, before we do that, let's go down to the bottom, because we won't see what's going on correctly until we fix something here. So I've got this commented out, and what I want you to do is just go down to about line 187 and take the comment tags off of this. So I'm going to take this off, and this will break it it'll break the layout for the float version, but it'll make it look okay for the grid version. So I'm going to take that out and that out. And then now it's broken. Obviously the layout is broken for the float version, but that doesn't matter because this is, and you've probably seen this before, maybe in a different video. That's why I didn't make you type it. But this is a CSS feature query that says, using @supports, it says, do you understand display grid? Yes. If that's true, then do this stuff. And all this did was reset all the widths to auto and set the margin to 0. Why were they not at auto already? Because all the fallback code is already in here for you. So if I go back up to here, about line 53, you can see that the header, the nav, the links search, the content, they all are floated by default, and they all have widths inside. So what that does is it created our float-based layout that we were seeing a minute ago. Now we just kind of reset all the widths back to auto. So that turned off these widths, and now they don't have any widths, right? They're all 100%, or the width of their content, so that's why it looks like that. So just wanted to make that clear as far as what was going on there. But it'll allow us to visualize our grid as we do it. The other thing to notice is this layout is just made up of different kinds of containers. We have a wrapper div around everything, so that's where we're going to do most of our code, actually. And then we've got a header, a nav container, and a bunch of divs and article tags that basically make up all the containers that we're using. So pretty standard stuff, and it works good stacked up as a mobile layout. Okay, I think that's enough background info. Let's actually do this thing. So let's go up to about line 34 there, where it says .wrapper, and that's where we want to display or change this into a grid layout. So we're going to say display grid. That makes sense, right? And now it's got it's applied a grid, it's made it into a grid container, and then we also want some space between our elements. So we're going to say grid gap. And you may have seen this in a video already, so hopefully it's not too foreign. So that's the grid gap, that's the space between. So we set a display grid, which changes the wrapper into a grid container, and then grid gap is the space or the gutter between the elements. So now it looks like a mobile layout all the way across there. But we are using CSS grid now to do this layout. Okay, so I think that is good. So let's skip down to the next code that we need to add, which is down around line 123, something like that, where it says grid stuff. So now we're going to add the grid, the fallback code, all the flex box stuff, and the floats are already up there. So I'm not going to make you do that. But now we want to make 6 columns for our grid-based layout. So we're going to say grid template columns for this, and we're going to use our repeat notation, which you may have seen before, but if you didn't, I'll kind of explain it. Depends on the order you see these videos. And then I'm going to say 6, comma, min, max. And you can see I'm not getting pop-up sort of helper autocomplete code from brackets here because this stuff is not even in brackets, this version anyway that I'm using yet. So hopefully it will be someday, but not right now. So there, let me make this wider so you can see it all in one line. It's a little easier to read. So we've got grid template columns, and then we've got repeat, and we want to repeat this 6 times. So basically the way you can think of this is we want 6 of columns that are either a minimum of 100 pixels, that's the min part, wide, or a maximum of 1 FR, which is 1 fraction of the total width, which in this case is about 100%. So we could write this a different way and write it six lines of it, but this is sort of a cheaper way to do it, a quicker way to do it. So we want 6 columns that are between 100 pixels wide and 1 FR wide. So you can see in our layout, we have 6 columns already. So 1, 2, 3, yeah, 6 columns there. So that is our underlying column sort of thing that we're doing. Now we're going to make 6 rows. So for that, we use grid template rows. And we're going to do the header area. So these are in order, right? I'm going to do 200 pixels for the header area. And then I'm going to put auto 4 times because I want the next 6 or 4 rows to be auto size, which is basically using their content, which is what we usually want, right? So I've got auto, that's 4, right? And then 100 pixels for the footer. So we've got 200, that's this one, then auto, and then 100 pixels. So this isn't quite looking right yet, but I think it'll probably straighten itself out in a minute. Okay. Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, so now we want to define our grid template areas. So I'm going back to our handy dandy complete guide to CSS grid here because it kind of explains it in a nice way. So grid template areas define a grid template by referencing the names of the grid areas which are specified with the grid area property. Repeating the name of the grid area causes the content to span those cells. So you're basically telling the browser to span CSS grid cells with the content. A period is an empty cell. You'll see an example here. And you can kind of see, it provides a visualization of the grid. So you can kind of see the structure of your grid when you do this. So here's an example. So it has, let me see if I can get this on the screen here. So here's the grid template area right here. That's the property we're talking about. And then we've got header, 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 header. Main, dot, sidebar, footer, 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 footer. What does that mean? It's telling the browser that these different elements are going to span those cells. So header, 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 header means the first cell, or the first 4 cells in the first row. Each of these is a row. There's a row, there's a row, and there's a row. Almost like tables. It kind of is like tables. The first one is header, 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 header. That sounds weird, right? But that means there's a header in this cell, header in this cell, header in this cell, and a header in this cell. So that's the whole thing across, right? Then the second line has main, dot, and sidebar. So that's main, dot, or period, is when you have an empty cell. So you're letting the browser sort of just create an empty cell there in the table. And then sidebar is over here. And then the bottom says footer 4 times. That means footer is going to be in all 4 of those cells down there. Pretty cool, huh? So it does look weird. Each one of these is just a line. Each line represents a row in your design or your layout. And then each element inside of those rows represents a column. So we got 4 columns and 3 rows, 4 columns, 3 rows, right? Yeah. Then you have to match up these, and these words can be anything you want, really. They don't have to be the name of the container itself or the ID or the class or anything, but you can kind of do that. But here's how you match them up. So this item A, here's item A up here, is going to be grid area header. That means that whatever has a class of item A, dot means a class, is going to be filling up this header area. So you're kind of matching the container with the sort of grid area. Yeah, it's kind of like a little bit, if you've ever done an image map, it's kind of like that as well. You probably haven't, but that's what that is. So hopefully that made a little sense. It will make hopefully more sense when we do it here on ours. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to paste in this next code because there's kind of a lot of it, and I don't want to have you guys sit here and watch me type this. It's just kind of ridiculous. So I'm going to paste this in. There we go. And let's take a look at this. Make this wider so you can see what's going on. So you might want to pause here and type this in. I didn't really leave you time for that in the video, so go ahead and type this stuff in. Sorry about that. We've got grid template areas. We're kind of defining our grid here. And then it says header, 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 link search, link search. It kind of goes with our table that I made earlier. So header, 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 link search, link search. So you're kind of going row by row, column by column, and saying what's in that container, or what's in, not in that container, what's in that that grid cell. So here we got nav, main content, main content, main content, sidebar 1, sidebar 2. Same thing here. Nav, main content, main content, main content, sidebar 1, sidebar 1. Oh, I guess I changed it on this one. But it's similar. So that means sidebar 1 is going to go across there. So you kind of just go row by row and say what you want in each one of those. And we have 6 rows there because there's 6 lines there. Try to make that line up a little bit. It makes it easier to see. We have 6 rows because there's 6 of these, right? And then we have, in this version, and we have 6 columns because there's 6 each. So they have to kind of add up too. If you don't make them add up, there probably some weird things will happen, but try to make them add up the way you want it. All right, so that is that. So now we defined where we want those grid areas to be, or what cells we want those grid areas to span. But now we have to match the content items, the actual code, and they're using classes such as nav1 and header and link search and content. We have to match these with the names that we made up for our grid areas. So that's not in there yet. So let's do that next. So all you have to do then is say grid area, and the first one is header. So we're now saying that this div down here, I'll just show you on the first one here. This header has a class of header. Wow, that's imaginative, Mark. But anyway, this header has a class of header. So now we're matching this container, this header container, with the grid area called header, which is going to take up 4 columns, right? So header, 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 header. Now it's going across 4. Look, header, 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 header. It's taking up 4 columns. So now that we're matching up these actual containers in our code with our plan for our grid areas, it should start to take shape as we do this. So let me get this out of the way so you can see a little better. There we go. Okay, so that's it. So let's go ahead and do those. I'm going to copy and paste to save a little bit of time here. So we've got grid area for nav1 is called nav. And then these are just the class names that I applied already for you guys. So the link search is, and I did use some of them, I think the exact same name as I used the same name for the grid area as the class, so it's the same thing kind of. So there's link search. So now this is taking up 2 columns, right? Content is called main content. So this should be main content. There we go. And you can see it's starting to take shape, right? And then sidebar 1 is sidebar 1. That's imaginative too. But you feel free to do that. It's fine to use the same name for both. There's sidebar 1. And sidebar 2 is sidebar 2. Ads are called ads. And then story 2 is story 2, I believe. Yes, story 2. Story 3 is using the story 3 grid area. And then footer is footer. So maybe I made it more confusing by using the same name, but remember, this is your grid area. This is your class name for that box that we made. Yeah, I think it's working here. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that we are now inside, we jumped down directly, but we are now inside the first breakpoint, which is at 750 pixels. So these styles are not going to come into effect until we are at a minimum width of 750 pixels. So if I resize this down below 750, it's still our mobile layout, which we wanted to start with, right? Because that's what it looks like on like a phone. We get above 750, and now the floats come into effect because they're above this media query as well. This is a media query, right, that says we want these styles between that start here to come into effect at a minimum width of 750. So all the float stuff started to work, all the flexbox junk and the thing we just did started to work. So that's why we're in the first breakpoint, and we're gonna have 2 breakpoints actually. So make sure you wanted. I wanted to make sure you knew that. Okay, so we also want to use a. Right now, this is using flexbox down here in the bottom because that's already up here. Right. So the footer has display flex on it. So that's creating a flex box in the bottom, and then the other links section has a flex grow of 2, so it's a little bit bigger than these other containers, so because it's allowed to grow twice as big, kind of relatively. So we're using flexbox as a fallback in the footer. It's already kind of laid out, but we can also put a nested grid in there. That's what we're doing now. Where are we? Okay, so here we go. About line 170. So it says grid area footer. We're also going to turn the footer into a grid container instead of a flexbox. So all I have to do is kind of override our previous code by saying grid, or sorry, not grid, display grid. So now we said display grid on the footer, and we also need to say we're going to create columns again. So we're going to say grid template columns, and we're going to use our repeat function one more time since it saves us a little bit. Repeat, and we want 6 columns that are 1 FR wide. And so now we got 6 columns that are 1 FR wide, right? It's not filling up all the space because we only have 5 things in there, so we have an empty space. But we want our other links section to span 2 cells. So we probably have seen this before, but I'm going to go ahead and put grid column, and I want it to go from grid line 2 to grid line 4. So that means that the other link section is going to span from grid line 2, which is here, to grid line 4. Grid line 3 is in there. So now it fills it up, right? Because I've got 6. I've got 5 things, but this one is 2 columns wide. So now that adds up to 6, right? One other thing is you can use a lot of, or some of the flexbox properties also work in CSS Grid. So I'm going to say align content, and I'm going to say center. So what that did was it aligned the content to the center of the grid cells. So now it's vertically centered in there. So some of this, like align content, you can check out the list, but A lot of these Flexbox properties also work in CSS Grid. Okay, so I think that is probably good on that. I think we're good on that. So now we're going to say what we want to happen above 1,000 pixels. So here's our second breakpoint, which I keep messing up here. It says media screen, at media screen, and minimum width 1,000 pixels. So after 1,000 pixels, we're going to change the layout again. And this time, we're going to have 5 rows instead of 6 to make that layout that we were looking at earlier. So I'm going to say grid template rows. And it's going to be 200 pixels. Again, that's our header. And then auto, but only 3 this time. And the bottom one, the footer, is 100 pixels high. So now we've got 5 rows instead of 6 because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me make this wider again so it's a little easier to read. Now we need to define the areas that each of those same grid areas are going to take up. The way I'm going to do that is the same way we did it before. I'm going to paste this in again because, again, I don't want you guys to sit there and watch me type. It'd be kind of boring, right? You probably figured out on the previous one that you could pause the video, right? I didn't mention that before, but pause the videos while you type this stuff. So we've got grid template areas, and now we've got 5 rows here because there's 5 of these lines here with the inside the quotes, right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we just remap where we want things to go at those widths. So that should fix that layout. So let's see, I think we're about done. So let's see if this works here. Oh, wait, first I need to give you time to type this. Go ahead, pause your video and type. You're typing, right? You pause the video. Oh, I'll be quiet so you guys can type. Okay, I think you're done. Sweet. I heard you guys typing. So now we've got this layout here. So let's see if it's working, if I did everything right here. So we're out at 1,000 pixels, or like 1,200 is our max width. By the way, there's a max width on here. Let me go back up, which I didn't mention, but it was already on there. Where is it? Here we go. So the wrapper has a maximum width of 1,200. That's why it's stopping out here at 1,200 pixels. So from 1,200 to 1,000, it looks like this. With this area, pay attention to this area over here, right? Then when I go down, I get down to 1,000. Ah, it works. Okay, so got down to 1,000, and we remapped our grid areas to 1 column instead of 2. So here's 2 columns, here's 1, right? So now it fits a little better. And then from 1,000, or from 1,000 to 750, it looks like this. And then when I get below 750, and of course you could change those numbers if you wanted to, right? Or have more different layouts if you wanted. But once I get below 750, it pops to the single column mobile layout. Hey, it worked. Amazing. All that junk worked in there. So I think we are good. So hopefully that helped a little bit. I know it's confusing and a little strange, this grid areas thing and the whole CSS grid thing, but hopefully that made a little bit of sense. And it does provide kind of a cool way to kind of visually say like where things are. If you think about it, and it kind of reminded me of ASCII art a little bit. If you've never seen ASCII art, this is probably not necessary to show you guys, but here's some ASCII art. ASCII art is art that's made out of just text and with certain spacing, and it kind of reminded me of this, right? So this is sort of like telling you what is on the first line, second line, third line, and kind of like that, right? I don't know, that doesn't make any sense, but anyway, it gives you a way to sort of map out what you want your page to look like in certain conditions, and you can kind of visually see it, like the header's wide there, the content's this wide. Over here on the right, this is what's on the right, this is what's on the left, this is what's on the top, this is what's on the bottom. So hopefully that helps a little bit, and I'll see you again next time.